In the early days of the feud between Kjotve the Cruel and the Raven clan, there was a mad berserker called KIARR RAWBONE. KIARR had pledged his battle fury to no king or jarl, and would give his oath only once each winter, for reasons nobody could fathom. One year, KIARR's sister Thora was married to Kjotve's brother Alrek, and soon KIARR was often seen in the company of that clan. But soon after, word came to KIARR that Alrek had abused his sister. When he asked Thora about this, she told him, "It is true." So KIARR invited Alrek on a hunting expedition. And when they were away, KIARR slew Alrek and pulled off one of his arms. When he returned to camp, Kjotve asked where his brother was. KIARR shook his head and held out his hand, in which was an arm ring. "Your brother bid me give you this ring, Kjotve." Confused, Kjotve took the ring, and with it came the entire bloody arm. "Your brother pledged his oath to Hell herself," KIARR laughed. Then he turned and departed. He was never seen in those parts again.
We need an epic tale!
During my 19th winter, King Styrbjorn ordered the construction of a new longhouse. The splendid hall you now see at Fornburg. To build this longhouse, he employed the help of 20 men. I was among them, as was FRATHI, the strongest and stoutest man I had ever seen. We set about felling trees and hewing wood for timber. FRATHI was the fastest of us, dropping 41 trees in only 2 days. On the third day, a spindly man called ONARR was near upon felling his first tree. He had hacked it all the way around like some mad animal. When the tree fell, it did so in a direction he had not wished. Straight down upon FRATHI. ONARR called out, but it was too late. FRATHI had only enough time to turn and face the doom bearing down upon him. With that, he raised his arms to embrace the timber hammer. The force of the trees falling drove FRATHI deep into the snowbank, yet his arms never let go. He held that angry trunk as a lover. Like hounds, we scooped at the snow to reach him. We found FRATHI 10 feet down, alive but in pain, still bearing the tree upon his shoulder. Yeah! There was a woman called Nal, who came by ship to Fornburg unheralded, demanding to meet King Sigvaldi, Styrbjorn's father. Nal was from Gautland. She was tall and rugged and strong, and everyone who walked near her said she smelled of men's blood. When her message was sent to our king, Nal was made to wait a full day. Yet she did not complain. She watched the waves and sang songs. Night came and went, and still Nal sat by the shore of the fjord singing her songs. She skipped rocks with children and smiled. As the afternoon of the second day approached, King Sigvaldi's messenger reappeared. They spoke quietly together. At last, the messenger stood back and waved to some men nearby. 3 men bearing 3 chests of silver approached quickly. They set the chests of silver in Nal's ship and stood back. Then Nal stepped forward, swinging a large, bloodied sack before her. Nal opened the sack and emptied it on the shore. 7 pairs of hands tumbled to the ground. Nal then mounted her ship and sailed away. ONARR the Ugly was an excellent sailor who could pilot a longship entirely on his own. This is why King Sigvaldi kept him around. In all other matters, ONARR was a cruel, anxious and humorless man. He was one of the most unlikable people I have ever known. One year, I recall we had invited some carls from the Yngling clan to dine with us. As we were serving ale, we came to find that we had none left. It so happened that the ale had run out just before reaching ONARR's horn. This raised in him a word storm, and he accused Sigvaldi of treachery. Every man in the longhouse jeered at ONARR for raising such a fuss. This made ONARR angrier than before, and he stormed out. A short time later, we heard him yelling through the door of the hall. "I set this scorn pole upon the men of Yngling for their dishonor!" We looked outside and saw that ONARR had severed one of the heads of the Yngling's horses and stuck it upon a hazel branch. When he saw us gathering at the door, the Yngling carls among us, ONARR panicked and ran. He was not seen for many months.
Let's hear a story.
I knew a crazed man about my age called ROKR, who we had taken to calling ROKR the Rodent for his habit of collecting axes. For 20 years he collected axes of all make and size. He had never seen a day of battle, but he swore to Thor that he would. In his 31st year, after drinking too much ale, ROKR seduced another man's wife. That man called a holmgang against ROKR. ROKR accepted the holmgang, and on the agreed-upon day, he laid out 12 of his axes and asked, "Which of these will I use to slay you? Will it be Bone Splitter?" he said. "My bearded blade inscribed with Seidr runes, affixed to a handle of English oak? Or Blood Fountain," he continued. "My Dane axe, which swings through the air on 2 hands with the speed of an arrow's flight. Or might it be Twin Wolf Wounder?" ROKR growled, growing even more bold. A fierce pair of throwing axes. At that moment, the man who had challenged ROKR brought a large stone down upon his head. ROKR died instantly, and his axes were given away as gifts. A story from my youth. This one has no lesson to be learned or message to be gleaned. Often my father liked to take me on hunts in the forested lands east of Avaldsnes. I loved these solitary times with him. I had never felled a beast myself, and my father saw that this upset me. I was only a boy, but I had the dreams of being a man. So one winter, my father asked me to perform a bargaining ritual to the goddess SKADI to improve his bow skill and snow sight. With glee warming my heart, I cut a hare and sacrificed it to the goddess, asking in exchange of skill and sight for my father. When the ritual was done, my father and I set off into the forest. We hunted all day until night fell, and we slew no game. That night, around the fire, I was sullen. My sacrifice had not been heeded, yet seeing my sad face, my father only smiled. "Had you been hunting," he said, "you would have killed 6 fine deer. For SKADI, hears only those who speak to her."
You Salskulls got a story.
When I was 11 winters old, I was the youngest of my favorite cousins. A wild and rowdy bunch of boys and girls. Together with our parents, we attended a feast at the home of Halfdan the Black of the House of Yngling. To toughen our patience, our parents set us with the old woman, who ordered us to bake flatbreads and serve it to the noble jarls. After an hour, the flatbreads piled so high into pillars, you could have built a roof over it and called it a longhouse. When our work was done, an older boy, Guthrod, suggested we steal a keg of mead and drown in happiness for our good work. So Guthrod, Mikkel and Åsa snuck into the storeroom and stole a barrel as I stood watch. But when we were spotted, I froze. 3 of Harald's men stopped us. They struck Guthrod and Mikkel and pushed Åsa to the ground. "Whose idea was this?" they asked. I stood and said, "The idea was mine. The meat is for me." One of the men eyed me and said only, "That is not true." Then they moved on. Some years ago, I took to sea with a sword dancer called EGIL. A brooding warrior with a face of stone and oak-hard arms. On a raid in Courland, we shored up along the edge of a forest and explored until we came to People Pots, a large farm. It was night, and all were asleep. So we set about plundering the place in the quiet of eve, taking sheep and goats as we pleased. It was then that Egil saw a farmhand and pressed the boy for the family's hidden silver. The farmhand squawked like a crow. Being hid beneath an anvil at the smith's forge, the silver was no trouble to lift. In secret, we took it and the boy back to the ship. It was then that Egil grew sad, for when the farmers woke with the crack of day, they would know they had been robbed. Not by whom. So Egil ordered 3 of us to follow him back to the sleep-hushed hamlet. As we burnt the houses, Egil shouted his name. I am Egil, son of SKALLAGRIM, and I am the man who deprives you of everything but your life. I never sailed with Egil again.
Is there a sea skull among you?
Here's a tale to tickle your sides. The winter before, I was drinking in Stavanger with some companions. With us in the mead hall were men of Bard Jarl's clan, one of which was a poet named HALLI, called Sarcastic HALLI by most. 7 ale horns into his night, HALLI stood upon his table and called across the room to another man, a skald named Tjodolf. Tjodolf, he yelled, I can compose a more beautiful poem with my belching than you could with your tongue and fine words. The room laughed, Tjodolf loudest of all. I accept your challenge, Sarcastic HALLI, he shouted. Allow me to begin. Tjodolf then spoke this verse. Sad HALLI drowns in horns of hubris, squeaking like a stoat, yet proudly the pup calls it poetry. The room laughed again, with HALLI joining in. Then, HALLI tripped across the room and opened his mouth to speak his verse. From his throat erupted a jet of vomit into Tjodolf's face. His only composition that night, of which he seemed most proud. In my youth, I remember hearing the story of KALDA, a fierce young woman whose father forbade her from swordplay and raids. KALDA had skills to match or surpass any man in the clan. And so it was that her beloved Gapi asked her aboard his ship. Once again, KALDA's father forbade her to leave, calling her soft and weak and fragile. But KALDA ignored these insults and left. For a full spring, KALDA and Gapi sailed the coast of Francia, raiding and plundering and taking much silver and riches. Then, in the early weeks of summer, a passing ship gave KALDA the news that her mother had died suddenly. KALDA was grief-stricken. KALDA returned quickly home, only to find her mother there, alive and standing quietly beside her father. KALDA was confused. KALDA's father spoke with a sour voice. I sent a tale of your mother's death, for you were insolent. But now you are home, where you must stay. Hearing these words, KALDA pulsed hot with rage. She slew her father and fled back to her ship, then set a swift sail for the horizon.